15 minutes for your questions. You, right here.
I have a
Do you want
question,
to?
probably mostly for you, Kathy.
Oh, okay.
Is there a possible legislative action that could keep the coal companies from paying their CEOs a ton of money before they go bankrupt and screwing all their workers?
Yeah, so the question was, is there legislative action that we can do that would prevent CEOs from getting bonuses and screwing workers? That was...
And then going bankrupt.
And then going bankrupt.
Yeah.
And in all honesty, as much as we all would like that, the reality is bankruptcy law is federal bankruptcy law. Federal bankruptcy law is designed to keep businesses open at virtually any expense, and that expense means workers' salaries, their pensions, their health savings accounts. It also means it goes ahead of reclamation. And the belief of bankruptcy courts, even though they will take a look at those kinds of payouts, the argument that has been successful, and in my mind very regrettably, is that we need the best people around while we go through this incredible difficult transition period. And it's been successful as an argument in federal court. And so we have actually asked that question, and that's the answer that we've gotten. We'll go to Michelle, and then over here. Hi, Michelle.
So thank you, first of all, very much for your comments. For me, as I think about this, I'd like to ask the panel to speak about what does it take to create the conditions to recognize that as coal disappears, we have to recognize that coal is also paying for the bulk of our revenues in the state of Wyoming, and how do we begin to think about both the workforce in tandem with tax policy in a way that recognizes that we are relying on coal to fund our schools, to fund most everything that happens in the state, in addition to other energy resources. I'd love your perspective on that.
Do you want to do a general?
I can do. Well, I think the first thing is to be able to quantify your exposure to coal fiscally. And so we did an analysis. My research assistant, City Doshi, is here somewhere, co-authored this paper with us. And we had so much trouble going through the budget documents of Wyoming, trying to figure out, like, where does the money go? Where does it come from? Where does it go? We found no fewer than 33 streams of revenue from various tax instruments that depend on coal to various state and sub-state jurisdictions. 33 streams that we couldn't even put dollar values to. We could just see them on a diagram. So I think one of the first things I would do is reform the way Wyoming and its constituent jurisdictions report and analyze data so that leaders in these areas can quantify relatively easily what their exposure to the coal industry is and do thought experiments and fiscal modeling to project what their revenues would be under different coal production scenarios. Because I don't think they can do, I certainly couldn't do it. We spent weeks looking at this data. So that would be number one. First, understand quantitatively the problem. And then second is once you can quantify, all right, you're talking to economists, so maybe this isn't going to be very convincing. But once you can quantify the problem, then you know what the magnitude of the solution has to be. What do we have to diversify? How much revenue are we going to have to backfill? What are the options? What are the pros and cons? But I don't even think you can get there until you've kind of done the first part. That's my first 2 cents anyway.
What she said.
Okay. I can add a little bit as a former member of Appropriations and a member of the Revenue Committee right now, and on the Coal Bankruptcy Task Force. And we certainly are looking at and asking those exact questions and what the answers can be. We need a different tax policy. There's no two ways about it. Right now, we as a state have been wholly reliant on the extractive industries for our revenue, and the most stable of it has been coal. Adele talked about that to start with, that, as a state, we're going to have to kind of understand we'll need to behave like other states sometime very soon. But the reality is, right now, economic diversification will do virtually nothing in terms of changing our revenues, because we don't have a tax policy right now that taxes any other entity, any other corporate entity other than the extractive industries at any meaningful rate. We just don't. And in fact, it will cost us money. Right? It will cost us money to bring in other businesses, whether it's retail, manufacturing, you name it, it will cost us money unless we change our method of taxation. And so we have had several bills that have come up over the past couple of years. And you're going to shoot me, but it's the income tax bill, it's our corporate income tax bill, but we have to go down those roads. We have to go down the road of thinking about changing how we tax based on assessed valuation. We only tax 9.5% on residences, 11.5% on businesses other than the extractive industries, and the extractive industries pay 100%. We're going to need to up those property taxes, right? Those are all possibilities. Upping sales taxes, it makes us more comparable to other places. So we have to go down. How do we create the conditions? It's by having, and honestly, not the hard conversations because we've already had them, but the hard implementation strategies. We have to do it at the same time as we keep our workers in the state, as we stop the brain drain. All right, who else?
Well, I wanted to know what Adele thought about the carbon tax and dividend bill that's in the House, I believe.
We actually have 8 carbon pricing bills that have been introduced in this Congress, and that doesn't even double count the House and Senate companion bills. So this is really, one of my associates calls this the year of carbon pricing legislation. And some of those bills actually have Republican co-sponsors. So we are starting a dialogue about what the next generation economy-wide climate policy might look like. And all of those 8 bills are economy-wide. They would apply to, 7 of them are excise tax bills, and that would apply a carbon charge to the carbon content of fossil fuels produced and consumed all across the economy, plus selected other greenhouse gas emissions. And it's in that context that I've been working really hard to try to encourage members of Congress to include a title that would allow targeting of some of that revenue back to coal-reliant areas. And that would deviate from the pure fee and dividend type model that imagines that every last dollar that comes into the federal government goes back out in the form of household rebates. My own view is a better deal, certainly for coal country, would to allow some of those revenues to be brought back to the people who've kept the lights on and help them with the transition. And so, for example, the Citizens Climate Lobby, I'm in full disclosure, I'm on their advisory board. I've been talking to the folks from coal country that are members of the Citizens Climate Lobby, and helping them think through, what should they be asking for as part of a carbon tax bill. And I'm seeing a lot of openness. I'll be honest with you, certainly all the Democrats that are sponsoring this legislation and some of the Republicans say, sure, yeah, we get it. Coal country is going to be disproportionately burdened, and they have no problem with putting in, I don't know, maybe an earmark of 3%. Look, you got $1 trillion over the first 10 years. $3 billion a year for 10 years could go a long way.
We'll take it.
Sorry, what was the name of your paper that you referenced at the beginning?
Well, the most recent one is called The Risk of Fiscal Collapse in Coal-Reliant Communities. Really cheerful. And the one before that was almost as cheerful. It's called something like The Risks to State Governments of Relying on Mineral Production for Revenue. And the first one was a little more optimistic, called Build a Better Future for Coal Workers and Their Communities. So I mean, as time gets on, I get a little more grim each time I have to write this paper. But my next paper, just to frame it positively, it is our intent to write a paper on each of these key challenges, whether it's mine reclamation or health and pension or black lung or water quality, to really inform the legislation. It's one thing to say, okay, we got to siphon some money. Like, it's another to say, well, what exactly do you do? Like, who's spending what on what activities, and what's the accountability, and what are the objectives, and what are the statutory authorities, and how do we actually do it properly? And I will have to say, I did kind of a precedent analysis, and the federal government is really pretty terrible at kind of coming in and being genuinely helpful when there's like a concentrated industrial collapse. Like, we just don't do that very well. So my hope with my research is to like kind of at least start with a clue about what might genuinely be effective, because I think it's so important that, you know, if we do have these kind of resources, and I hope we do, that we can be responsible and effective with them and learn from experience, learn from mistakes, learn from successes, and just have as clear-eyed a view as we can about how to really ameliorate what are going to be and already are very significant burdens.
Yeah, let me just, this bestseller, The Risk of Fiscal Collapse, one, it actually has it in a chart regarding municipal bonds in the 3 counties that Adele looked at, one of which was Campbell. You've got $500 million in Campbell County of municipal bonds that are reliant on that assessed valuation that is overwhelmingly paid by the coal industry. $500 million in bonds that who knows what's going to happen. So that's a whole other element that we didn't talk about in relation to taxation. Okay, the gentleman right there had his hand up for a while.
We hear a lot about taxes, raising taxes, income tax and all. You know, the basic problem in Wyoming is government waste. Local level, the state, and the feds, you know, all the way through. How about cutting some expenses? Cutting some waste? You guys waste a lot of money down there.
Well, the woman who's going to.
Yeah, I'm gonna retire soon, so I can say whatever. I will tell you, we are not a general fund agency. You pay for us through your electric bill, which isn't any better, I'm sure, and through your utility bills. But we are an office of 6, and carry the burden of ratepayers a lot, and we figure we cost you a nickel, residential ratepayers, you know, just breaking it down, industrials, businesses pay more, but we figure we cost you a nickel a month.
Okay, I can say one thing. So I can't comment on what's waste and what's not waste, but just to give you an example, Boone County, West Virginia, has already experienced most of its mines closing. So their coal production is down 72%. And we tracked a decline in county revenue of 38%. So unless you think 38% of your county government is waste, you're gonna have to figure out what to do about it. So like that, you might be able to trim around the edges. I think 38% would not be edges in most county governments.
I think Robin has something.
As it relates to our funding, we're 11% general funded, and the rest is federal and other funds. What we're seeing is, because of the cuts that we've had previously, is we have ideas for programs to push into the communities to assist, and I'm afraid that we're not able to do that because we've got people already doing several different jobs because of cuts that we made earlier. That's not to say that there aren't things that we could do, I think, here and there that would make a difference, but truthfully, I think it would be pennies on the dollar in terms of what we could save. I certainly hear that when I spoke to people around the state, maybe we need to cut more. But I think we're at the point now, in my humble estimation, that now you're going to have to decide what services you want cut then, because it is going to mean services in your communities that are going to be starting to be cut. So that's where the thought process is. Certainly services can be cut, but I think that means, I guess that's the decision that needs to be made. If you want more cuts, then take some services out and then start some of the other discussions to go forward.
Thank you. I'm somebody who's absolutely willing to squeeze the turnip, honestly, get every drop of blood that we can out of everything we have available. And I hope and I think that I did that when I was on the Appropriations Committee. That being said, we are an enormous state in terms of geography, 10th largest in terms of literal space, and difficult space, beautiful space, but difficult space. We have virtually no economies of scale when it comes on a statewide basis. If we wanted real efficiencies in the state, you know what it would mean? It would mean that we would consolidate counties. We waste, if you want to call it that, so much money because we have 23 different county systems, right? We'd close small schools. We would, right? Sheridan 3 up here, you're gone. Sorry, right? That's what cost us money. We want to drive 30 miles or less to get to a Department of Workforce Services office or a Department of Family Services office for foster care, for food stamps, right? We'd close them, right? That's what it would mean. Other places, they can, you can have one office building and it can take care of 100,000 people. We can't do that in this state. We can't. I'm willing to look at that, but the reality is it would close down Main Street in the Wyoming that we know because of that consolidation would absolutely be necessary. That's how we get the efficiencies. The other thing that we try to do in this state is to go out and about, right? We don't do things only in Cheyenne, right? We try to do that. If you wanted to be more efficient, everything would be done in Cheyenne. We wouldn't be coming to Sheridan, we wouldn't be going to Rock Springs. But that's how we would do it. So no, if you want efficiencies, I can give them to you. I can tell you how to do it, but that's what it would look like. We'd also close several of the community colleges, right? That's what it would mean, all right? We're not talking nickels and dimes anymore. That was done. That was done 8 years ago. And I'll also be honest with you. I'm getting on a roll here. All right, we need to backfill. We have seen some immediate devastating impacts of some of those cuts that we did 5 years ago. Almost a direct, and I hate to say this one, impact that we stopped funding a sex offender program in the Rollins Penitentiary. You know what? It was one of the few successful programs in the nation, and we had virtually a 0 recidivism rate for sex offenses. You know what? We don't have that anymore. And we have the recidivism rate that we used to. We cut money for prevention organizations for suicide. And it just hit the paper. Our teen suicide rate has skyrocketed in the past 5 years. Right? Can we point to any individual person and say, we cut this money and this person has now died? Of course not. But we do know that those things happened, right? To me, that's what those cuts mean. Can you wrap it up? All right. One more question, and I guess Liza?
So can you speak to, nobody loves the T-word, not used to that, but how about real estate transfer tax? Can you speak to that?
Real estate transfer tax, we tried it, it didn't work.
It didn't raise revenue.
It didn't, no, not that we tried it, it didn't pass.
Didn't pass, but.
Yeah. All right. Another, what about the guy in the back? One more, last one.
I am really excited about the transfer to different energy, but is there any discussion in 20 or 30 years from now about what to do with that waste from, say, batteries or solar panels, and to a lesser extent, wind?
Okay, you want to do this one? Yeah.
Thank you. Is that, it's a question that I think is not very well answered yet. And I was at a lot of meetings with Rocky Mountain Power when they were developing this new plan to put in a lot of solar and batteries particularly. And because wind is almost more traditional right now, but and they said, well, we're watching it. We need to figure that out yet. And so I think it's a unanswered question, which is another reason why I'm glad that the plan that came out was not some of the early drafts where things were done so immediately in larger quantity, because we can start to look at that. But I know from talking to some of the utilities is that it is an open question still on some of this stuff. And batteries need to be changed out like every 10 years is what they're presuming in their plan. So those are assets that are going to have quicker turnover and more waste associated with it at that point.
No? All right, thank you all so much, and another round of applause for our panel. It's been a real pleasure.